As we've discussed before on this channel, English nationalism or UK patriotism has had a lot to do with this absolute fiasco of Brexit. You saw it, the thing of judges being called traitors and the whole sovereignty argument, which isn't an argument, it's just saying the word sovereignty and somehow it'll magically happen. you know, this whole and all of Brexit itself is based on magical wishful thinking of essentially a Britain that can never be and will never be again, because again this is all based on British nationalism and harkens back to essentially the height of the British Empire, a time where essentially we instituted a zero tariff policy, but not completely, because British firms essentially got first dibs on imports from the colonies, meaning that they, even though there was zero tariffs, they could outcompete any foreign business because they got first dibs on all those colonial resources. And that was pretty much the UK's operating system almost up until even after decolonisation. This is why British industries suffered so much, because they lost the colonies after the Second World War. And the whole of British industry just did not move on from that. Hence why British industry suffered so much. And not only that, but then got no support to actually modernise or anything like that. In fact, there was a program I was listening to, and it's some of the stuff that we still do today, the way that we still manufacture some of our stuff today in the UK compared to how they do it in Europe, is still exactly the same way as we did it in Victorian times, which for a modern economy is really truly shocking. And it goes well beyond that. It really, really does. And we've got a fantastic article here from The Guardian, all about how English nationalism is once again raising its ugly head during these really crunch period talks. And I fully expect not only to see this go potentially into overdrive, especially next year, where it's, I still worry next year it's going to be awful. But anyway, before we get into that, please do remember to hit the like and share button, and of course down below there's a link to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link, and thank you to the people that do support me that way. Right, into the article. So obviously this comes from The Guardian, and the title is "English Nationalism has a champion in number 10, but it's a very fragile concept." There was a blast of what we used to consider the big beast conservatism last week, when Chris Patten, the former governor of Hong Kong, told The Independent of his fears for the UK under its current Prime Minister. "I don't think that Mr Johnson is a conservative," he elaborated. "I think he's an English nationalist." And it is not so striking as it would have once have been to hear Boris Johnson being repudiated by his own tribe. He has always chosen his inner circle for their loyalty to his chaotic and radical schemes, and truthfully, none of them look much like conservatives at present. Yet it is interesting, now that we're governed by one, to consider what an English nationalist actually believes. In a world of paradoxes, the most immediately striking thing is that in an intensely nostalgic creed with very shallow and recent roots, its mascot is Twitter, is a user born in the 1950s, complaining that he didn't fight a war to pretend that his birth just to find a Polish picked vegetables in his corner shop. It's stubborn and a powerful longing for a monocultural garlic-free England that didn't exist, nursed in the hearts of people who would have never been alive for it to even had it existed. English nationalism has no hinterland, no cultural imagery, as academic Alex Niven described it. It has no aesthetic more distant than the Great British Bake Off, and even that is a complex patriotism is laced with as multiculturalism and human warmth. This is the inevitable consequence, not of nationalism, but of Englishness, which has only very recently ever tried to conceive itself as a separate identity from the rest of the British Isles. Not all nationalisms are created equal, and they aren't all equally problematic. It's possible to build a social, rational, and hopeful border movement if you ever have an external oppressor threatening your demographic agency or geographical or racial grounds. It just doesn't work when you are the oppressor. So, English nationalism is fundamentally an inethnic creed, which, in another paradox that nevertheless makes sense at the level of the soul, that gives it an unquenchable obsession with authenticity. The real English voter is, again, in a recent construct, dressed up as an eternal one. The angry left behind voter in Mansfield is authentic. The voter in Tower Hamlets, with just as much reason to be angry, and the proximity to Canary Wharf, does not, it transpires, make you rich, is not. The angry retired solicitor in West Sussex is an aesthetic, and is the working barrister in Brighton is not. On face value, your legitimacy as a voter derives from your rage. The angrier you are, the more real it is. Essentially, though, there is not an implicit racial dimension that you're only real if you're white. The closest the English nationalist movement will come to saying is when they refer to the white working class as the locus of all honest political responses. And all white working class, incidentally, hasn't existed in the memory of a single politician alive today. But if you ever call this worldview racist, its ardents go bananas, which only goes to prove their superior authenticity. If English nationalism plays big at the ballot box, and it does, this is not because anyone swallows its circular logic. It's barren opportunism and the manifest contradictions. Rather, it's a Trumpian offer. They want to make England great again in order to privilege its citizens over migrants. The nation's industry will be protected from foreign competition. Its jobs will be ring-fenced and not outsourced to cheap labour markets abroad. Underlying it are good questions about wage stagnation, dispowerment in the workplace, the division of profit between capital and labour, given the endlessly, however, the wrong answers. But you can see the appeal when the alternative solutions seem to lack plausibility or are just lacking altogether. And this is something that we on the left are really going to have to do. We're going to have to start putting forward real, true, and absolute solutions. And sometimes we're going to have to find ways to do this, to put it over in simple terms as possible. And that is hard to do, it really is, but it's something that we're going to have to actually try and find a way to do. Anyway, it continues. So there's a very real problem when English nationalism finally triumphs and, it turns out, doesn't care about the nation at all, doesn't care about the union with the rest of the UK, doesn't care whether it's a free trade area ends up smaller than its actual borders, doesn't care about its industries or jobs, doesn't care about its imports or exports, doesn't care about its excess deaths, which is a technical and tactful way of saying it generally doesn't care whether we live or die. And whether or not English humans are more important to them than French ones is completely moot, because they care very little about anyone. If as a nationalist government, you are not fit for your promise of compassionate, if insular stewardship, then what do you want to put into this place to keep the flame alive? Two things. First, the idiotic exceptionalism that, like so many dumb ideas, finds its true north in Education Minister Gavin Williamson. You remember why we got the vaccine first? It's because we're the best in the world at everything. Second is excruciating jingoism. At its least consequential, that might be an unmistakable remark about the German Chancellor wanting us to crawl over broken glass. At its most unsettling, it's gunboats in the Channel, chosen not, I think, for its proliferation of fish to be protected, but rather because of its English prefix. Like reproduction furniture, though, of MDF dressed up as a Queen Anne or a corner cupboard, English nationalism is an ugly thing in and of itself, made uglier by its presentation. But it is also very fragile, and you don't need to find its weak point. It has no strong points. You just need the confidence to actually reject it. So I think that's what, um, again, we really have to do. But sometimes it's hard to come up with arguments because we've seen this constantly in many of the comments of over the years of doing this, of just bizarre things. And it's like very often you'll reply, no, that's wrong because of this. The original comment doesn't care. Many times they'll just they'll fly off the handle calling people traitors or whatever, name calling. So we've all seen it before. But as I must say, and I always continue to express, we must always try and approach these people with some compassion, because at the end of the day, I always said you've got to separate Brexiteers from Brexit supporters, because at the end of the day we are going to need to convince a lot of these Brexit supporters that they were conned, and that they have been conned by a very, very wealthy elite who doesn't have their interest at heart, even though has told them multiple times that they apparently really do. And trust me, next year that is going to be very, very hard to actually try and justify, especially in a post-pandemic world that we are going to live in. And again, like I say, next year going to be very, very interesting to say the least. So anyway, thanks for watching, and please do remember to hit that like and share button on your way out. And of course, down below there's a link to my Patreon page as well as a one-off donation link. And thank you very much to the people that do support me that way. And as always, we'll see you next time.